Almost. Major. Holy fucking shit, this is major! Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Almost Major, where we talk about the many major studios and the films they release. We are on our 1980s New Line miniseries. My name is Kevin Tudor. I'm here with Charlie Nash.
Hello.
And Brian Doyle.
Hello.
And joining us again as our super special guest is Sarah Welch-Larson. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are y'all?
Oh, we're good. Today we are talking about Communion from 1989. This was released on November 10th, 1989. It has a budget of $5 million. Opening weekend made $822,000 and a domestic overall gross of $1.9 million. Top 5 films that weekend is Look Who's Talking, The Bear, Dad, back when you could just name a movie Dad. Shocker, hell yeah, Shocker. Shocker kicks ass. Crimes and Misdemeanors is number 5 also. Not as cool as Shocker.
I have only seen The Bear, and that was one of the worst my dad picked a movie for the family kind of experiences.
Oh, no.
Because my sister, and it upset me too, but my sister in particular was really young and loved animals. And that movie starts off with this little baby bear cub, and he's with his mom, and then like an avalanche of rocks just comes out of nowhere and murders the mother. And the poor little baby bear cub is just mourning. And then after that, it's just got a bunch of other, like, a leopard mauls the baby bear at one point, and it survives, but you're still watching a leopard maul this little cub, and dogs are sent out to hunt it, and they fall off cliffs. And at one point I think my sister just had to like excuse herself, like, or my mom took her out of the room basically. But
number 2 for the weekend, folks. Yeah.
It's a good movie. It was just one of those things where my dad was like, I remember this being really sweet, and it's a good movie, but it's just, you know, if you don't do well with animal violence or cruelty, it's kind of tough going.
Yeah.
The only movie from this top 5 I've seen is Shocker, and hell yeah.
I'll watch that as Craven research when we get to that.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any of these.
Yeah. Shocker is about a guy who gets electrocuted, and he can try to kill people through the electrical waves of televisions. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah, that sounds sick.
That does sound like that kicks ass.
Number 1 song in the U.S. this week is When I See You Smile by Bad English, and number 1 song in Canada this week is Sowing the Seeds of Love by Tears for Fears. Plot description from Google: a novelist played by Christopher Walken. The way that this is set up, a novelist's wife, I won't say the names because this is way too many actor names in a row. Let me get through this, Jesus Christ. A novelist's wife and son see him changed by an apparent encounter with aliens in the mountains. Written by Whitley Strieber, adapted from his nonfiction book. He also wrote the books that were adapted into Walken in 1981 and The Hunger in 1983. Directed by Philippe Mora. Prior to this, The Beast Within in 1982, The Howling 2 in 1985, and The Howling 3 in 1987. I unfortunately caught up with those today. Moving on afterwards, a movie that the title alone made me download it as soon as possible. It's Pterodactyl Woman from Beverly Hills. Yes. Sorry. From 1996. Once you see that title and you're just like, oh, okay. Yeah. Starring Christopher Walken as Whitley Strieber. Prior to this, won an Oscar for The Deer Hunter in 1978, The Dead Zone in 1983. After this, King of New York in 1990, Batman Returns in 1992, The Funeral in 1996. Don't check me on this. Nominated for an Oscar for Joe Dirt in 2001, Envy in 2004, 7 Psychopaths in 2012, and 9 episodes of Severance.
You mentioned Envy?
Yeah. I don't know.
I was expecting you to mention Brainstorm.
Envy.
I just think it's so funny. He's been in like every other movie that's ever existed, and you mentioned Envy.
Yeah.
A movie that I watched in a hotel room when I was bored when I was 12 years old.
That's how everybody watched it, but yeah.
He's also soon to be in Dune Chapter 2.
He is.
As Shah Emperor.
I hate to ask or interrupt real quick, but I'm genuinely curious what everybody's first exposure to Walken was, because mine
Envy
was
from 2004.
Yeah, I might be with Kevin. That was a VHS tape my family watched.
Are you serious?
It might be.
The J-Man. That's his character's name, I believe.
Oh my god.
I think I can up the ante on this one, because I'm pretty sure my first exposure to him was the Weapon of Choice music video.
Hell yeah.
Oh,
I forgot to list that, but hell yeah.
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 Mine was definitely Batman Returns.
I didn't see that until like
Respectable.
5 or 6 years ago, which it kicks ass, but not
it's
as good as Envy.
One of the best movies ever. I still sometimes think about the scene where he just goes, where he finally recognizes that Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. He goes, Selena Kyle, and she rips her mask off, and he goes, "You're fired."
Let's see. It's in between Envy or Pulp Fiction. 1 second. Let me see. No, it's got to be Joe Dirt. Has to be Joe Dirt. That was 2001, so yeah.
He
was in Kangaroo Jack.
He was in Kangaroo Jack.
Oh, fuck. That might have been it.
Yeah.
That, Country Bears, I think he's into.
Oh my
God.
I completely forgot that the Country Bears was a thing.
I mean, I don't even know if I've seen that the whole way through. I know I've started at VHS tape multiple times as a kid. But yeah.
I just remember seeing the trailer for that, and it's just like everybody in those animatronic bear costumes. Isn't like it one about like the kid being like, "Mom, am I normal?" And they're like, "Of course you are, dear," or something.
I just had a sense memory of that.
Yeah.
I kind of wish that I didn't remember it.
Mid 2000s for Disney were weird. They were just like, how about we do a movie about cows and Roseanne Barr is the lead character? And you're just like, sure. Just funnel money down the drain. I don't care.
Emperor's New
Wacky
Groove.
movie, though.
Emperor's New Groove. Great Christmas hit. Everybody loves it. Hey, you know how that guy turns into a llama? What if we made live action films about like actual animal human hybrid things? That seems like a good strategy, right?
What if that guy who played that, if he played somebody named Joe Dirt, and they were just like, that's great. That's awesome.
I've never seen Joe Dirt. I just can.
Me neither.
I have the poster like seared into my brain. Isn't he holding like a mop or something?
I thought you were going to be like, I have the poster on my wall, but I've never seen it. I go to bed saluting Mr. Joe Dirt.
The only way I can get to sleep at night is knowing David Spade is just above me.
No, I've seen Joe Dirt probably a good like 60, 70 times.
How about the sequel?
No, nobody's seen that. That was a Crackle original in the U.S., Bryden. I don't know if you know that.
Wait, was it really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Envy, I remember nothing about other than he has a line that's in the trailer. He goes, good for you, good for you, good for you. That's all I remember.
That was one of the first movies I remember thinking, this movie sucks, when I was like 12.
It was a woof. I remember watching that with my dad, and yeah. Anyway, Lindsay Krause is in this movie as Anne Stryper. Prior to this, All the President's Men in 1976, Between the Lines in 1977, Prince of the City in 1981, The Verdict in 1982, and House of Games in 1987. After this, another Alien movie called The Arrival in 1996, and I'll probably watch that garbage. 9 episodes of Buffy. Imposter in 2001, I will probably also watch that garbage. I almost did for research. And Mr. Brooks in 2007. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
She was in Mr. Brooks?
Apparently. I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen Mr. Brooks, Kevin? That's some fascinating garbage. That movie's
yeah, I'll probably watch
weird. And you were, a date. Cut this out if you don't want that.
Don't throw me under the bus. Yeah, I was about to say, yeah, I saw Employee of the Month and Good Luck Chuck around the time, but
you didn't see Mr. Brooks.
No, I didn't.
I mean, Dane Cook sucks in that movie too, but like that's a movie where you're like, oh, Kevin Costner has like a Jekyll and Hyde like serial killer alter ego kind of like right before Dexter came out, I think too. And then you're like, I guess this movie's going to be about that. And then the movie's actually, oh no, everybody wants to be a serial killer. And it's like, oh, what? Or it's just like, yeah, his daughter wants to kill people. Dane Cook wants to kill people. Demi Moore is in like heat mode where she's trailing him, but they never have a scene together. It's a weird fucking movie. But
Danielle
kind of
Pennebacker's in this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the first line of our friend Mitchell Beaupre's review is, best parts of this movie. Number 1, Dane Cook pissing himself. They list other things, but that's fine. Where are we at in Mr. Brooks? Trivia for a comedian. While serving as an executive producer, author Whitley Strieber, whose experiences serve as the basis of the film, expressed concerns about Christopher Walken's ability in portraying him. When he finally told Walken that he might be betraying him as a little crazy, Walken replied, if the shoe fits. Yeah. Which, I'm not going to do a Walken impression, but just hearing him, thinking about him saying that is just fantastic. The director originally had met the author in London in the late 1960s 1960s. After Moore made his film Death of a Soldier in 1986, in the 1980s, he ran into Stryper again. They got to talking and Stryper mentioned his recent experiences. Moore told him that if he got around to writing about it, to let him know. The scene in which Stryper laughs when he sees the visitors was Christopher Walken's natural reaction at seeing the alien designs and thinking they looked silly. The director liked his reaction, thinking it made the scene more disturbing, and kept it in.
Oh, man.
The aliens kind of look like a mesh between Emperor Palpatine and Dark Helmet from Spaceballs.
A little bit. I mean, at first, when it's like creeping, which you told about, that's basically that they mentioned that in the first episode of South Park for some reason.
Yeah, that because I was like, well, this is just like Cartman gets an anal probe, but is that just me being me? And then I was like, no, that was a direct rereference to this movie.
Like that was cool. We'll get into it, but once the aliens started dancing and shit, I'm like, this is just clown shoes. What are we doing? Stryper chose to have the film produced independently, as he feared having a major studio adapt his experiences would turn it into special effects heavy horror film rather than a character piece. Wish this would have went to a major studio. Anyways, during production, it was reported that on set some members of the cast would crack jokes at Stryper's expense about his autobiography aspects. Stryper said of these incidents, some people who work on movies are nice people. Some people who work on movie are jerks. We had the usual mix of crew. I will say I listened to about the first 2 or 3 hours of the audiobook for Communion and then just quit caring, but which he says in the book, very curious on what everybody's reaction to this, because I was just like, no. He said that snickering about people talking about alien abductions is like laughing at rape victims. And I was like,
ooh, yikes.
I was like, okay,
pal. Do you think he's talking about specifically, because I feel like I hear people joke about anal probes, that kind of stuff in alien movies. Is that maybe what he's specifically referring to?
I guess.
I mean, this movie does take that thread fairly seriously too. And I respect it for it.
Sure.
But
that's my issue, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that was kind of my issue with what's going on here is it's trying to take it seriously, but also be very kind of jokey and weird. And I didn't know what it was tonally going for. And it just, that kind of that quote basically reaffirms my weird feelings about this thing, which is it feels like kind of two forces kind of at odds with each other, where one is a goofy sci-fi movie and then another is very much an allegory for rape and trauma that doesn't feel like it's being respected, but yeah.
One part is the Moore movie. The other part is just okay, this were his alleged experiences, so we need to do this by the T. And then the other times it's him in a top hat just being nuts.
Yeah.
It wasn't a dream.
There's a group that meets.
Group?
People who've seen the same sort of things you have.
Which group of aliens abducted you?
Bob, we are not victims. We are participants.
I don't recall them being human.
I've got to go! My baby's screaming!
You people, you sit there, you're in for one big surprise.
But yeah, that's all the trivia I have. So initial thoughts. Bryden, initial thoughts on Communion.
It's interesting you bring what the movies seems to be sort of brushing up against this sort of not just the trauma of this guy being abducted by aliens and being experimented upon, but specifically it's treated like sexual trauma and anything where they're probing him and everything and they're taking it seriously. And and it is a thing that when people make movies about alien abductions that is I mean, Independence Day, they people are cracking jokes at Randy Quaid's character who says he was abducted by aliens, they're making jokes about that specific stuff happening to him. And it's interesting that this movie does make sort of vague references to referring to it as some sort of assault and everything, because I think when Walken goes to see his family doctor, they say well, it happens to men. It does happen to men, it's not out of the ordinary, but it's the movie. I mean, and I think it's also seems true to the character that he kind of that Walken will crack jokes about this and everything. Kind of, he doesn't want to take it seriously and everything because he kind of can't even quite comprehend it and everything. And he's also sort of skirting around it, not wanting to deal with it. So I think that's like really interesting. And it's also interesting to keep that lens in mind because as research for this, I watched more as you mentioned The Beast Within, which is a horror movie about a monster that sexually assaults women, and like it, as a result of it, the woman has a child who then turns into the monster, starts exhibiting characteristics of that monster. And that this movie, Communion, also deals with like the idea of like, you know, inherited trauma and everything, and like the worry about like passing it on to like other people. It's kind of an interesting. Both movies kind of have like weird sort of off-kilter tones to them and everything, where like Beast Within is dealing with like this very bracing subject matter, but then it does also have like this sort of like classical horror movie look to it and everything, where it's like, you know, people like running through forests with like fog, like large amounts of fog like filling up the screen and everything, and like, you know, graphically gory scenes of like people getting their heads ripped off and everything by a monster and everything. So it's like it is kind of like a weird mashing of sensibilities, and you do get this in Communion, where it is trying to be this psychological drama that takes this character's sort of emotional toll of like this experience, the emotional toll of this experience on him and his family very seriously. But then you will have like these scenes where it is like, you know, treating his experience like a genre movie and everything, where like, you know, like like a horror movie where like, you know, you get like the really sharp cuts between the present day reality and like the flashbacks where it's like maybe what did happen to him. It's also like, I will say what's interesting about The Beast Within is that like, as a point of comparison, is that movie like starts with a horrible event and then cuts ahead of time where the characters are in the midst of experiencing another horrible event already. In Communion, you do get the sense, it starts out where the family is sort of going about their everyday routine, but you're still destabilized because the way those scenes play out are so bizarre. They're cut and directed and performed in like the most bizarre way possible. So like and then you have like the horror scenes where this character is dealing with this very disturbing experience. So there's even in like the ordinary scenes of this movie, there's never a moment where I'll speak for myself. I was never very comfortable or sure of where the movie was going. And I found that in a way kind of exhilarating, where I was just like, what is this energy of this movie? It's so frequently bizarre. It's bizarre, but I do feel like the movie is consistent in how like these scenes play out and everything. Like, you know, Walken doing all kinds of like weird bits with his family, you know, the way he like sort of talks to himself while he's like writing his book and everything. And everyone's like kind of talking over each other. It's like very chaotic in the household and everything. There's often like people aren't sure of where each other are. They're saying like the kid will ask like, where's my dad? And like they won't know. And then that does sort of, you know, factor into, that does seem to be like that sort of gap between the family does sort of get exacerbated as this character sort of like shells himself away from them and trying to deal with this horrible thing that happened to him. So I found that really interesting. I think Walken and Krauss are really good in it too. Some of the dialogue is very bizarre, but like it's like they do seem to be like emotionally convincing, and like, you know, there is like a sense of like history and like the where they shared these little jokes with each other. Like that's the thing, like talking about like it's interesting to hear about how they were not taking this movie very serious. Maybe some people were not taking this movie very seriously while making it, but like whether that's like stuff that was like then filtered into the scenes where the couples have jokes with each other, it does seem like kind of germane to the way that the characters are. Like obviously it wasn't this, like it couldn't have been that and everything. Like they think it's almost too ridiculous to have happened and everything, but like I think that sort of like denial, the way they treat it with like the sort of sense of denial is like really I did find it rather like emotionally convincing in the movie. I'm curious to see how this movie would play on rewatch, because like I said, I did think part of the thrill of it was like not knowing how any given scene is going to play out. And there's like a lot of really strong directorial choices, which is refreshing after watching Stranded, a movie that makes no choices. But it does end in a bit of a weird place where like it's not quite satisfying. And I guess like it's because, you know, we're pulling from a guy's real life and everything where he did, you know, come out the other side of this experience and everything. It's but like I think I'm curious to see how the ending would play and everything, but I sort of liked the uncertainty, I guess, because it's like this guy like trying to figure out what happened to him the whole time, and then like even when he does get answers, it's like, well, like I sort of know the what and everything, but like I'm only gonna get like closure up to a certain extent, and I still have to deal with this and everything. And then like him sort of like still ending the movie like with that sort of lingering sense of fear, I think is I did find that like satisfying in its own sort of unsatisfying way, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. It's an odd duck of a movie for sure, but I did get stuff out of it that I was not expecting. It was not the kind of movie I expected it to be, and I found that kind of refreshing. I'm curious to hear what other people thought. Oh, one more thing. Also, Kevin was shitting on an Eric Clapton score, or the Eric Clapton theme in the credits in our group chat before I saw the movie. Put that Norman Rockwell freedom of speech painting up in here, because I'll stand up to say I like the theme.
Oh my God.
I don't think the music is bad. I just don't know if it's tonally appropriate.
It's also over fucking used. It's the same goddamn guitar noise like every 5 fucking seconds. Eric Clapton, shut the fuck up.
I have sometimes very corny taste in music. Like I know, like I thought of like how like a lot of people shit on like the light sleeper music that like Paul Schrader uses in that movie and everything. I love the score in that. So like I feel like that this is like they're cut from the same cloth. But yeah,
I think it.
Own it.
No,
Yeah.
I think it definitely sets a mood. I just don't know if the mood syncs up with what this movie is.
As somebody who enjoys, unironically loves Limp Bizkit and Korn, you're in good hands, Bryden. It's fine. Sarah, initial thoughts?
Yeah, I found this to be kind of uneven, and I think part of it for me was the level of detachment and repression kind of mixed a little bit with everybody's like suddenly and unexpectedly heightened emotions. And I think that could have worked if the movie had been able to handle the shifts in tone a little bit better. But I don't know, Bryden, like you said, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I felt like the movie kept signaling to me that like one character development was going to happen or another one was going to happen. And then it kind of felt like it either wasn't willing to follow through or it followed through to the point where I was just like, you're telling me what I already know because you already sort of hinted at this in the first place. And so for the most part, really didn't work for me. I wasn't a big fan of most of the very deadpan delivery of what was happening. I do like. I'm always happy to see Andreas Katsulas on screen. Like, it's weird seeing his actual face because I am familiar with him primarily as Ambassador Jakar from Babylon 5, in which he plays an alien with a rubber forehead and a lot of makeup. Like, I'm used to hearing that voice come out of like a very clearly like this is a dude in a suit kind of alien type character. But he brings a level of pathos to his character in that show that I don't think he was really fully allowed to do here because he's just kind of playing this rote, like, pat character who is a little bit superstitious and also a good friend of the family who's just there to kind of corroborate that weird shit is happening at this cabin in the woods. I didn't get a really good sense for why the weird shit was happening at this one specific cabin and why, like, nobody else in the area had also experienced something similar. I guess that sort of could be chalked up to the mystery of, like, who can tell what these aliens are up to? But all of it just felt really arbitrary to me, which really bummed me out because the premise for this movie is really interesting. It's just that the execution, I don't think particularly worked for me, especially because when Walken's character starts going off the rails, it didn't really come across as this is a guy who was entirely all that there to begin with. It just kind of felt like a slight heightening of an already erratic person. Like, when we first meet him, he's yelling, like, I'm cooking, boom, like, as his computer is breaking apart. And it took me, like, a full 30 seconds after that scene ended to realize that he was actually angry that his computer was breaking. Like,
I thought he was hyped he was writing
he was
something.
upset.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, that's what I thought, too. And I wasn't entirely sure, like, how to get a full beat on this character before he starts having these experiences. And I think if you're going to have a movie about like the unraveling of somebody's psyche, you better damn well have like a solid baseline, regardless of where that baseline is. Otherwise, like, you're kind of unmoored from reality in the way that this character ultimately is supposed to be, but like, it doesn't ever really fully work. That being said, there's some pretty effective stuff in here, especially the shotgun scene with the cabin. I think that like that 30 seconds of this movie works so much better than anything else. And it works in a way that like, I'm glad I watched it, if just for that 30 seconds. And then I'm also really bummed out that the rest of the movie didn't live up to that promise.
Like every 30 seconds, I'm just gonna have Eric Clapton's guitar just wailing in the background of this podcast.
Yeah, that music did not work for me very much either. It felt a little bit like an interstitial from Friends or something, which like it's a little bit strange if you're dealing with like balancing the genre and balancing like what is supposed to be a really serious family genre, like family drama movie, and then you're gonna undercut it with Eric Clapton. Like, I'm not a big Clapton fan to begin with anyway.
And he's
so,
also
like,
an asshole too. So like,
yeah, for me, it's like it's both him as a person and then also his artistic stuff. Like, neither of them worked for me, so like it just straight up didn't do anything for me there.
It sounded like outtakes from like Miami Vice, even though Miami Vice is dope and the song choices are pretty good. But I can see that like Tops and Crockett like driving down the 101, just like blasting Eric Clapton and shit. I will say, after I've seen both Howling 2, Howling 3, and this movie, all of his movies are like, do not make any tonal sense. And a lot of, like with Bryden, that could be, and I've been there as well, where I'm just like, I have no idea what's going to happen. This is awesome. But Howling 2 is like, you just keep throwing everything at the screen, and it reminded me of like when a kid is like, hey, look what I can do, and they just like kind of jump, and you're just like, wow, that was crazy. And then 2 minutes later, like, hey, look what I can do, and it's just like that for an hour and a half. It just gets like, I don't know if it's like if there's like a barrier between him being like a French Australian director and him doing these movies in America. I'm pretty sure Howling 3 was actually in Australia, but there's like this weird, like there's something wrong with a lot of the movies. It kind of reminds me of like almost like what can be a good thing with like a giallo movie, where it's just like that makes it feel more unearthly and weird, and this just makes it feel like annoying. But I don't know, I really have nothing to say, but other than I was trying to get on the wavelength of this movie, and it's just so long, and I did not care, let me tell you. And also watching Fire in the Sky right after this, which is a very, very, very similar movie, which is also a movie that is interminably boring. And I'm just like, is there any movie about real life, quote unquote, alien abductions that are just like, wow, this is nuts? But Fire in the Sky does have like 10 minutes of like some of the most like intense shit I've ever seen in a Hollywood picture. So
really,
and then it just goes back to like, I don't know, like a small town family drama. And I'm just like, no. Those aliens were like torturing my man for like 10 minutes straight. Like, whoa, it is awesome. But yeah, which I didn't get to The Beast Within before Communion. And I mean, I'm like 0 for 3 for this, man. So I'm like, I don't know if this is the one if I should go back right now.
And I will say with Beast Within, I do like that movie. It is like I said, I mean, I just laid out the premise. That movie is like it's merits a content warning for like how it deals with it, because you do see some pretty upsetting stuff in it. That's also one where like I like Communion. I think like that. It's interesting to bring up as a point of comparison with Communion, because like The Beast Within, it's mostly about like, so the mom gets attacked by the monster and everything, but the movie's mostly about the dad, Ronnie Cox, and like the son and everything. And it's like, oh, okay, like you're not like getting quite the right perspective and everything of like what this should be and everything. Like I feel like there's like some untapped complexity there that like you're just kind of like ignoring. Communion at least is like, yeah, that one at least, that movie at least gets like is focused on the right perspective, in the sense that it's about actually the person who goes through this traumatic event and everything, as a point of comparison. But yeah, I don't know. Interesting. Those are like movies that were like I can see like there's like stuff that's not quite right about them, but they're interesting to me all the same, even with their flaws. But yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm gonna finish my night with The Beast Within, but
yeah,
maybe I'll put that on the back burner. Yeah, I have nothing else to say. Charlie.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you, Sarah. Like I found myself. This is a very strange experience for me, where I found myself constantly amused by certain oddball choices and very wacky decisions. And then whenever I felt myself being kind of amused by like, what is this? I was kind of like, but this is a movie about assault. Like, this is a movie about sexual assault, like in terms of an allegory, but I feel like the movie itself doesn't fully commit or understand, or it's just not tonally. Maybe I shouldn't say it doesn't fully understand, because I didn't make this thing. I don't know what the director's intent was, but it just felt to me watching it like it was about him convincing the character that Walken plays, who was the writer, Whitley. Like, it felt like very much a no, you need to understand this happened to me type of thing, but it felt like the filmmakers behind it didn't take it seriously, which I'm not saying that has to be a thing, but I found the tone to be all over the place. And yeah, I never knew where it was going, but like every time it got like wacky, it felt like almost kind of mocking to me in certain ways that didn't feel like, whether or not, like, I don't believe in aliens, I don't believe in alien probing, but it's very much a film about a character who believes this happened to him. And I kept thinking of, it's a much different movie in terms of tone, but I kept thinking about the film The Entity with Barbara Hershey, which is based on a true story about based on a true story, in quotes. I use that because this woman claimed that she was sexually assaulted by a poltergeist on multiple occasions. And that film has many graphic rape scenes of an unseen assailant assaulting Barbara Hershey. And it is very brutal and very relentless in how it depicts it. But it takes the premise seriously and is always deeply empathetic to what she is going through. And by the end of that movie, she hires people to freeze the ghost in her house, which, when you think about on paper, is really
badass.
silly. But it comes off as very silly, but it doesn't ever take her trauma or anything lightly, which I feel like this movie consistently kind of is like. And now we'll have towards the end this weird discombobulating thing where Christopher Walken will be in a goofy costume and just saying weird things. And I was just kind of like, I don't know what tone this is trying to strike. And hearing Kevin, you mentioned that like people were snickering on the set, it almost felt like I don't know what this movie's saying. How do you not laugh
at those aliens dancing?
But every time I laughed and was kind of like, oh, that's goofy, I was kind of like, but this is about a guy who's like going through severe trauma, and that almost feels like uncomfortable to me and a not fun. Like every time I was kind of like, that's weird, I was kind of like, oh, but now I feel kind of gross, like the you know. And I'm not saying you can't add humor to any type of story. I also actually weirdly thought of, I know this is a much different type of film, but like the Paul Verhoeven film Elle with Isabelle Huppert is a very dark comedy at times, but it's always taking the pathos of her trauma very seriously and like The Entity. And here I just felt like they were like, I don't know, it felt weird to me that there were these scenes of like, that almost felt like outtakes from like a cast party of these aliens just like dancing around, where I'm like, I don't know. It just, I was just kind of like, what is the tone of this thing? What is this thing trying to say? Is it even trying to be about a rape allegory, or is it trying to be like, no, you really need to believe that aliens are real? Like I didn't really get what this thing was trying to strike. And I agree with you, Sarah, that the one scene that felt emotionally true to me is the scene, well, it starts off a little goofy, and it even has that shot of like Christopher Walken inspecting the house with a shotgun, and it even has this weird close-up of a stuffed animal when he opens a closet door, where I was like, oh, that's a good gag. And then he does fire a shot.
And he's completely straight-faced when he sees it, too. Like, he's not shocked by it at all.
No, not at all. And then he fires the shotgun at Lindsay Krause, and that's the moment where she literally just freezes in place. She's tear-stricken. The kid's like, what's going on? And Christopher Walken's tear-stricken. I'm like, okay, this is when they're going to start taking it seriously. Like, this is a moment where this is a game changer. Like, that was all kind of like setting the stage for like, this is a little weird, right? Isn't that kind of funny if you think that, you know, this guy's saying he's abducted by aliens, when you think that's a little goofy and far-fetched too? And I was like, this is when the movie's going to change. And then it kind of goes back to that weird, offbeat kind of thing. And I agree with you too, Sarah. I felt the same way, where like, I mean, we've seen Walken in like movies like The Dead Zone be completely changed by some traumatic event and actually go through some sort of arc. And I think he's very watchable, and he's always great. I love Christopher Walken, but he is in like oddball Walken mode from the get-go. So yeah, by the time that he has had this very life-changing event happen, it's like, I don't know what the change is here. I don't know what he's going through. What is his arc? I don't see anything. And again, then that shotgun scene happens, and I'm like, okay, this is where it's really going to come into play as to what's happening. And then it just keeps making oddball choices, and I'm not saying those were boring, but at the same time, I was kind of like, what tone are we going for? How seriously are we taking this as an allegory? What is the goal here? Like, and I'm not saying that like but it just made me feel I found it consistently watchable, but I also felt like kind of like queasy at all of it by the end of it. If that makes any sense, kind of like I just laughed at something which, like, because I don't, at the end of the day, do I believe this guy was abducted by aliens? No. Do I believe he was probed? No. I think something probably really horrific happened to him, that maybe he blocked it out. I also thought of Mysterious Skin, where one character thinks of, hey, I was abducted by aliens. No, it was actually this really awful thing that happened to you in your childhood, and you use this to block it out. So I felt kind of just uncomfortable by the whole thing, and I don't really know what this movie's goal is, because if it's just meant to be mindless entertainment too, where it's just like, but you're using imagery that is very imagery and references that are all very traumatic, and I don't know, I found the whole thing very baffling. And not necessarily in a fun way. Any fun that I had immediately went to a thought of, so yeah, not to be a buzzkill, but no, I just felt the whole thing kind of, it really felt kind of sour to me.
I'm on board with a little bit of like regression, like, oh, here's something serious that happened, and then now I'm going to try to repress it. I think where the movie loses me on that front is that it keeps hitting that same note of something serious happened.
Yeah.
But no, I'm going to completely deny it. Like, something serious happened and it's getting unearthed through hypnotism, but I don't want to think about that, so I'm going to walk out of the room. And I think we get that, like, revelation and then rejection, like self-rejection, at least 4 or 5 times probably, and it always hits the exact same tone. So I think I would have been more on board with, like, that unevenness of his character if the movie had had a stronger viewpoint about it, because I think it's really difficult to separate how the movie feels about what's going on versus how the character feels about what's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe. And I think that's the thing that bums me out, is that because the movie is also unable to take him fully seriously as a character, I get the impression that Whitley doesn't take himself very seriously as a character. And that's a good recipe for pathos if you know what you're doing and you're really good at controlling tone. But here, you don't really get that. And then you also get all of these different disparate threads. Like, there's the moment where Whitley and Anne's son asks Anne, like, Mommy, is God real? And she says, like, I don't know, like, maybe, I'm not entirely sure, there's no way to prove it, but, like, I would like him to be. Mm-hmm. And that kind of, like, plants a seed for a really interesting conversation about faith and doubt, and then also the doubt about, like, whether or not this thing actually happened and whether or not you actually need any definitive proof for it to still have been true. And the movie just sort of abandons it, like, by the wayside, which, again, like, it really bums me out, because at the heart, the script is about a guy who has something super traumatic happen to him. He needs to both convince his family and also himself that what happened to him actually happened and is as serious as it is. And then they need to figure out a way through it together. And you get that final shot of the three of them kind of, like, dressed all cool from the helicopter, like, floating away over New York City. And the shot looks really neat. And I kind of like that it shows all three of them as sort of a unified front, but it doesn't mesh very well with any of their character development up until that point.
No.
It just doesn't, it kind of falls a little bit flat. And again, it bums me out because you get that one final shot of everybody, like, looking collected and looking like they've got their shit together. And I haven't seen any evidence that that's actually what's happened with them. So it feels like that conclusion rings a little bit false because we just haven't earned it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It feels like it plants a bunch of seeds, but it doesn't allow those seeds to grow, like you said with the do you believe in God thing. And then there's all this stuff about how it's going to get passed on to his son, and then he takes the death of his son very seriously, and I get that, cyclical trauma, but that's not fleshed out either. And there's also scenes where there's like a scene towards, I want to say 3/4 of the way through, where he's in a he's in like group therapy with a bunch of people who have also claimed that they've been abducted, and I don't know what the movie's tone is towards them, because it just seems like the movie doesn't take them seriously either. I don't know.
I think the movie does take those
genuinely
characters
don't know.
seriously. Like, I think it, like, they're addressing... The characters themselves address the worries that they're not going to be taken seriously, because when they find out that Walken's a writer, they're saying, hey man, I don't want anyone writing about this. This could really fuck up my personal life if you talk about this.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think also, like, really, like, bringing up the allegory for sexual assault and everything, there's, like, the character talking about how, like, the way they deal with it is, like, they view themselves, one of them says they view themselves as a participant in it and everything, as a way to sort of, like, deal with it. And then the person says, no, I didn't want what happened to me and everything. I was a victim and everything. So, like, the movie's really making that, like, those parallels known. I also don't know that I agree that they're quite collected at the end. I think, like, there is, like, I think the movie, I like that the movie begins with them sort of already seeming kind of in disarray as a family. Like I said, like, they're kind of talking, there's a lot of overlapping dialogue and sort of chaos in the home with, like, the burnt duck and, like, you know, Walken just is, like, kind of a weird, he's just kind of like an eccentric personality. And even to the point where, like, when he's, like, you know, kind of unraveling because of this, like, I think at one point Chris says to him, like, this isn't funny anymore. Like, like, I think she's just sort of like he's doing one of his bits and he's just taking it really far, and it's like, no, this isn't a bit. This guy is, like, really going through something. And then I do like the end of the movie where the light comes back, like, there's, like, that blinding light that comes through, like, his house and everything, and, like, he sort of, like, goes up to the roof, like, takes his whole family there, and he's just kind of, like, looking around. And I think and it's key too, the lack of resolution, like, the lack of closure that he gets, like, when he goes to see the aliens. Yes, that scene does have, like, sort of the weird thing where those aliens look really fucking goofy, and, like, Walken's doing that King of New York style wiggly dance. But I think, like, the key line, like, when he, like, takes off the alien's mask, he says, like, I didn't come all this way for you to tell me that that's what it was and everything. He's kind of, like, saying, like, that's it? This is what happened to me? Like, you know, that doesn't, like, help me, like, get over this or anything. And, like, how to deal with it, I guess, like, he writes this book and everything. But, like, that he still has, like, that lingering sense of unease, like, him and he's worried that, like, it could happen again. Like, I guess, is, like, maybe the note that it's supposed to end on. I don't know. That's maybe my interpretation of it, but, like, I don't know.
I that's the thing, is, like, I have no problem with the lack of resolution. And I mean, if even going back to the sexual assault allegory, like, I mean, obviously they're going to live with it. He's going to live with it the rest of his life and not be sure of when this type of, whether it's memory is going to trigger him again, or if he's going to feel, like, threatened again. It just, the movie, maybe it's just because those opening scenes are so weird and, like yes. I just, there's no sense of, like, what is this person actually like? And I don't need the movie to be like, he needs to be a normal person. I mean, again, I brought up Paul Verhoeven's Elle, which I remember a lot of people were really thrown off by, like, Isabelle Huppert's character does not react normally to this type of stuff. And of course and even the entity where it's like, I was, you know, raped by a ghost and nobody takes her seriously, but, like, and they don't act necessarily quote unquote rational either, but the tone of the movie and how it depicts these things is just so kitschy. I don't know. Like, I don't know. It felt like the film itself didn't take the material seriously enough to provide enough pathos for me, apart from that one scene with the shotgun.
Right.
Like, I just don't know. I don't know what the handle is on what the movie's handle is on this material. I wouldn't be so, like, questioning about this if it wasn't so explicit about anal probe references and imagery and trauma responses and all of this stuff. It felt like it kept trying to be two movies meshing together, and it just felt very odd.
At least two, I think. There's also this thread where in the beginning of the movie, Whitley's kind of running around with a camcorder the entire time. Like, he's constantly filming himself while he's writing. He's filming his son at the Christmas pageant. Like, he's always got something sort of mediating between himself and the world. Yes. And maybe that kind of lends to the sense of detachment that he has. And then towards the end, as Whitley and Anne are kind of, like, hashing out their relationship in the art museum, That scene didn't really work for me, at least in terms of the framing. Like, it's a little bit weird to have Christopher Walken, like, basically deliver the moral of the story in front of an Andy Warhol painting. But there's a lot of direct-to-camera addressing that's happening between the two of them. So, like, the reverse shot isn't over the shoulder. It's literally, like, straight down the barrel of the camera. And I wonder if part of what the filmmakers were going for was, like, this guy has finally been able to be honest with himself, and now he's able to be a little bit more honest and open and direct with the rest of the world. That's the most generous read I can get on this movie, because I don't think that it fully works. But if you think about it just in those terms of, like, mediation and then actually talking about your problems instead of talking over each other, I can sort of see where it's coming from. I just wish that the rest of the film had been able to be a little bit more cohesive about those themes, because it's like, it's really all over the place and it's trying so much. And most of it just doesn't stick, other than the tears after that shotgun blast, because boy howdy, that like 15 seconds just really, really works.
Yeah. That's interesting. That art gallery scene is weird, especially like Krause's line where it's like when she's talking about the aliens, she says, I wrote this down, I think they gave you something, a gift. You better use it. And I'm thinking like, huh.
That's gross.
It's a weird way that the movie and like, I don't know. It's weird for her to say that. It's like, it's... Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how the movie. That's a weird way for the movie to sort of come to the conclusion. I don't know. That line sort of is hinky for me.
It also kind of weirdly dances around sex, but also is very like at one scene, like, first of all, I think I texted you because I was like, there's like, at one point he's got the Polaroid camera and he's taking photos of Lindsay Krause and he's like, take your clothes off, huh? And then the sun pops out from the other frame and is like, ha, 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 ha. And I'm like, you're doing this in front of your child? So I'm like, there's clearly a sexual relationship here. Yeah. But then, like, at one point, Lindsay Krause is literally like, I'm your wife, I'm beautiful. Like, what's the matter with you? And I'm kind of like, okay, so they like... she's declaring that she's not feeling, sexually satisfied in a certain weird, muddled way that's, kind of weird that the movie's doing this when it's like, I am female character, you are male protagonist, like, type of thing, not to get, like, especially, like, I don't know, overly woke or whatever, but like it was just kind of weird where Lindsay Krause is basically like, I am wife, I need to be desired, like, type of thing, where she felt kind of just reactionary to him, but the movie doesn't really, it feels like afraid of sex and also afraid of like dealing with sexual violence in a way. Like, again, I don't know what this thing is trying to do, and I just felt like the movie itself is afraid of its subject matter or facing it head on in any kind of way. It kind of just does like this kind of cheeky, like, wink humor in a way that I felt like it needed to be a little braver or more audacious to tackle this stuff head on if it really wanted to get into the messiness of kind of a serious subject, or it tackled the subject about alien abduction, but that didn't want to get into the messy allegories of how that can transgress into, basically having your body violated. I don't know. Like,
yeah. I can see there also being a much worse version of this movie where everything gets explicitly said, too. And that 100% would not work for me. I think too much is being explicitly said, even like the stuff where like Anne is saying like, I'm not feeling particularly loved, feels again like that thread of compulsory heterosexuality that we were talking about with Stranded too. But yeah, I don't know. It's a mess. It feels like somebody sorting through a lot of messy feelings in a way that ultimately doesn't work for me. And I really hope it worked for him, but I don't know, man.
Totally fair.
And again, I bring up the entity because at least for, even if you don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, that movie at least treats it as like, even if you don't believe this is a true story, this is the movie, we're going to deal with it in movie terms, and we're going to deal with this type of trauma head on. Like, in terms of the sexual violence and in terms of the character's psyche and the pathos that we're going to provide. And then we're going to hire people to freeze the ghost. Like, and you don't have to believe in any of this stuff in reality, but within that universe of the movie, this is what's going on. And then it also deals with, voyeurism and stuff like that. This thing, I just don't get any sense. And again, I bring up The Entity also because it was made around the same time. It was a 1980s horror movie, kind of ripped from the headlines type of, it could happen to you type of, paranormal type of thing. This thing, I don't. It felt like they wanted to take this story that he was like, this happened to me. Well, let's make a movie about that. But then they didn't really dig their claws into any sort of thematic substance that could hold water. They just kind of made it into, I don't know, it'll be a B movie or something. I don't know. Like, and what did you think? Because I feel like this movie, reading reviews on Rotten Tomatoes back in the day, this thing did get pretty tarnished. But I do know there are a lot of, Brandon, you're a defender. There are some defenders from people on Letterboxd who think this movie is genuinely disturbing. There is something to be said. I think that the costumes and the it almost deals with like kind of the alien sets that you'd expect of like flashing lights and fog machines and the jacuzzi and stuff like that. And then the aliens are pretty goofy looking. And I can understand why somebody would be like, that makes it more disturbing because it is a little like, I don't know, 1950s homage B movie type of thing. But it didn't work for me tonally.
Sure.
But I can understand, and I can even think if they just handled it better or even had the gall to like dive into it in a more head-on way, that it could work. But it all just felt kind of one step forward, two steps back for me in terms of the way they wanted to approach it in any type, in terms of getting to the meat or of any of the subject matter.
Yeah. I wonder, like, I have a gripe about movies that are like function as metaphors for things like grief or trauma. My gripe is that the metaphor can't be the only point. You also have to take like the surface level of the text like completely true to, which is part of the reason why movies like, Don't Worry Darling don't work, because the metaphor is the entire point and it's the only reason for the movie's existence. Here I think we're kind of caught like in a middle like place where the metaphor is the entire point and we can't take everything fully seriously, but we're still trying to have a drama about it. And so I wonder, like, maybe more commitment not to the metaphor, like the underlying subtext of the story, but more commitment to like, this is something that is actually happening to this guy. I wonder if that would work for me a little bit better. I hate speculating about like what could have been, but at the same time, like, what currently is definitely isn't working for me. And I would love to see a version of this story that like is cool with not coming out and saying anything except the text of like, I was kidnapped by aliens and here's what happened.
That is exactly what The Entity does. And that's why I feel bad that I'm not saying this movie should be this movie or why couldn't it be more like this. And I absolutely agree with you. I hope that what I'm saying isn't coming off as it has to be all allegory, because that's not what I mean at all.
For sure, yeah.
But, and I feel bad. I feel like I interrupted you in the middle of a point, Sarah. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I was wrapping up.
Okay. Yeah, because I realized as I was saying that now, no, that is not what I want at all.
While you were talking, Charlie, I just thought it was funny. You don't believe in aliens, yet you keep a bunch of glasses of water all around in your room just in case.
Well, yeah, just in case Joaquin Phoenix happens to rescue me with a baseball bat. Oh, my great dream. No, I'm kidding.
Any more final thoughts on Communion?
Actually, now that you bring that up, Signs is a perfect example of that.
Signs kicks ass.
That is a perfect example of pure alien invasion movie genre exercise, also allegorical about many things. That is a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Yeah. The found footage sequence kicks ass.
Oh my god. Completely works as a genre exercise, also works as a study of faith. Doesn't get too heavy-handed with either of those things. Yeah.
Maybe M. Night Shyamalan's best? I'll say
it's up there for me. I think The Sixth Sense is my favorite.
It's his last good movie, that's for sure.
Signs was my first, so it definitely holds a special place in my heart for that. I'd say, Signs and The Sixth Sense are definitely up there for me. Those are probably his two best. I would agree.
I think I'm there with you.
Yeah.
Sixth Sense, I think, is a fine movie, but then I think about that car scene, and I'm just like, is this the best scene of all time?
Like, God.
Good Lord. Anything else on Communion?
I want to, like, look into this a little bit more, but I did see when I skimmed Whitley Strieber's Wikipedia page. This is Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. There is a citation to an article that is now no longer up, so I'll maybe try to find it a little bit later. But there is something where he says he was annoyed about the movie. He says, this is the Wikipedia quote, Whitley Strieber has repeatedly expressed frustration that his experiences have been taken as, quote, alien contact, end quote, when he does not actually know what they were. So that's interesting about, like, the sort of, Sarah, you wanting the movie to be a little less explicit. It sounds like Strieber was a little less explicit about, like, his experiences, too. That's interesting bit of interpretation there. Yeah. Anyways, just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah.
Huh.
I also just thought of, like, I mean, you reading that he was upset about that, it just makes me think about how Stephen King was upset with Stanley Kubrick about The Shining for taking it in a different direction, where, like, Stanley Kubrick took it into a, what if this character was irredeemable and his alcoholism took in, and that's a brilliant movie, I think, in terms of, like, meshing the two together in terms of horror allegory without hitting you over the head, and anything could be happening. You could read it however you want, and takes the terror very seriously. And then, but I felt like, that, because it kind of feels like The Shining is a great example of how maybe he was disrespectful to Stephen King's vision, and Stephen King felt personally affronted by his own recovery in terms of being an alcoholic, as in how Kubrick adapted what was a very personal story for him. But that film takes that character and the terror of that very, very seriously, whereas this just felt like kind of disrespectful to him, and not like, and not that you need, and in a way that, like, feels like it just, kind of mockery. I don't know. I know you disagree, Bryden, so I don't want to over.
No, it's fine. Also, sorry for citing Wikipedia in a conversation about a movie. I feel like that's that's digging myself into a hole I could never get out of.
Silly bastard.
Bryden, I kept bringing up one movie as my reference point like 5 times, so you're fine.
No, like the start of the communion of the audiobook is like it's like an audiobook that was done like 3 years ago. So he like has been like, here's my life since the communion, and it's been a lot of what Bryden was talking about. So that's pretty well.
I was wondering when the communion supposedly happened. Like in his life. I'm trying to place it as like, did this happen pre the hunger or post the hunger?
Good question. The book is published in 1987, but
okay.
Let's see.
The Hunger rules, by the way. That's a good.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite vampire movies.
Yeah.
Which maybe speaks to like the vagueness of the story or something. I don't know. I feel like if you're going to adapt something, you don't necessarily have to be like precisely to the letter, this is exactly what happened on the page and we're going to translate it to screen. Like, I'm not interested in anything like that.
Yeah.
But I do think that you have to get at some like thematic kernel or whatever it is that grabbed you about that story, and then get that across like in whatever way works, which is part of the reason why like Annihilation as a movie really, really, really works as an adaptation of the book, even though they are completely different from each other.
Yeah, like
completely agree.
Yeah.
Kevin agrees too. He's just not saying anything.
No, that movie's dog shit. The book cover and Strieber himself make an appearance in the 2009 movie Race to Witch Mountain.
Saw that in theaters.
Okay.
No way.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I guess one other thing is like Walken's performance. I think is I love Christopher Walken. I think he's insanely watchable. I'm trying.
Bad choice.
You think it's a bad choice?
Yeah.
He doesn't work for me as a leading man. The other movie that I've seen with him as like a lead is Brainstorm by Douglas Trumbull. And like, that's a weird ass movie. And I don't think that one works particularly well either. And I'm not sure if it's like the Walken energy of it all, or if it's just like both of them happen to be not particularly great scripts. I'm not entirely sure. But
you haven't seen The Dead Zone?
I have not seen Dead Zone, no.
Because he's very
cool.
grounded in The Dead Zone.
King of New York.
King of New York, he's great, but King of New York is also, he's fantastic in that, but he's heightened from the get-go and then gets only more heightened because it's an Abel Ferrara,
he never feels cartoony, though, in King of New York.
Dead Zone's really good, too, because, like, that movie, I think what's really interesting about that movie is that, like, it's a guy who, like, has a near-death experience, and then he starts seeing, like, these visions of things and everything. And I like that the movie's so explicit about, like, everything he's seeing is real. That's, like, the movie's on the level about that. Yeah. But, like, his performance is so keyed up that you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense why people wouldn't believe him, because he seems, like, completely deranged and everything. And it's like that interesting kind of tension, both like within the performance and also like the movie itself. It's like, oh my gosh, how's he gonna get people to believe him if he's acting like this? It's like, yeah.
Yep.
Sold. I'm watching this movie.
Oh, it's great. It's David Cronenberg, and it's adapting speaking of Stephen King, adapting his book. But like he's so grounded at the beginning of that movie that when he ramps up at towards the more that things get heightened, the more you believe that he's having a break of some kind.
Has one of the best line readings of all time. Yeah.
But the ice.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah. It's great.
It's fucking awesome.
And that's the thing where I was kind of like, did Walken kind of just like improv or like kind of like take this to 11, and then they were just kind of like, we like his energy, let's go with this, and then it just kind of deviated from what they were trying to do. Like, I genuinely don't know. I don't know. Even and not to go, I feel like this is really backpedaling, but like they have this weird relationship with these friends who they share a cabin with, where I'm like, I don't know, everybody seems just fucking weird here. Like, I don't know what
what's their story.
What's their story? Who are they? Like,
I want to know like what Anne's job is, because
wife
Whitley's clearly unemployed. Whitley's clearly unemployed and like trying to write the great American novel or whatever. But their house is incredible.
Yes,
and
and they live in New York.
I'm dying to know what she does. Yeah.
And don't they have like two houses? Isn't that this house like?
Yeah, they've got the house in the woods, and then they've got this house, so...
She probably works like a grocery store, and back then that could, like, buy two houses, you know?
Oh, man.
Yeah, her role is wife. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, we need to wrap up. Any other final thoughts? Anybody else want to throw their hat in the ring about if aliens exist or not?
Blink-182 says they are.
That's true.
Or they do. Excuse me.
I'm alien agnostic. I'll go on the record as I don't feel like I can reasonably say either way.
Yes.
My opinion is a lot of opinions that I have in life. It's just I don't know if they are cool. If not, I don't know. We got some cool movies about them, but you know what? That's fine. I think a lot of people are like UFO means alien. It's just like no, it means they haven't identified it, man. Just give them a few minutes. They'll probably track down the serial number. They'll figure out what it is. But
I just watched Contact for the first time this week. Weirdly,
before
Contact,
good movie.
Good movie. How did I live for 33 years and not see Contact up until now?
I'm currently trying to read the book, and unfortunately, the book has not grabbed me the same way that the movie has. Which bums me out. But I've been informed by somebody else that. Like, you just got to get halfway through and then it really picks up. So I'm going to keep with it. I'll report back. But
please do. Also, in terms of that movie, great movie about, hey, Jodie Foster wants to contact aliens. Also happens to be a great allegory about faith without hitting you over the head about it. So there you go.
Hell yes.
You know?
Yeah.
thank you for listening to this week's episode of Almost Major. Please rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes. Please follow the pod on Twitter at Almost Major to keep up to date with what movies we will be covering in the future. Myself, I can be found on Twitter and Letterboxd at KevBonesy. Bryden can be found on Twitter at Bryden Doyle and on Letterboxd at JDoyle. Charlie can be found on Twitter and Letterboxd at CTNash91. Once again, thank you for listening.